everyone, it's Dr. Hayes, and in today's video we're going to be talking about R.F. Kuang and the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature 2026. However, before we go any further, I just want to give a little disclaimer and address my bias around R.F. Kuang, although I will chapter mark the video, so if you don't care, you can just skip it. But basically, when I do these videos, I mainly stick to the facts, like this happened, then this happened, then this happened, whatever, and then I kind of sprinkle in my opinion here and there. However, I have decided this time I am not going to be giving my opinion at any point during the video. Why? Basically, I read Babel by R.F. Kuang around this time last year. It was last December, and I unfortunately did not like it. I wanted to like it, as I do with every book I read, but I did not. I won't go into much other than I just didn't think it was written very well. I made a TikTok of my review of the book. Didn't really think much of it, didn't think it was anything particularly special since I review everything I read on TikTok, whether I liked it, whether I didn't. I make a TikTok about it. So I didn't really think much of it because I do that with every book I read. However, I ended up actually having to delete the TikTok due to the awful comments I received under it, including people calling me ableist slurs, which first of all is just disgusting, but second of all, these people either knew me well enough to know that I'm disabled or had gone and done some digging. Whilst I am disabled and I'm not ashamed of it, I don't hide it, I also don't feel the need to talk about it when it's not relevant. Like, have I even mentioned it on this channel? I'm not even sure, but I am disabled. I'm not ashamed of it or anything. It's just, if it's not relevant, I'm not gonna bring it up. Yet these people somehow knew. So as a result of me giving my opinion about a book, and being called ableist slurs as a result of not liking said book, which happened to be by R.F. Kuang, I've decided that in this video, because I want to talk about this topic, I do think it's a really important topic to talk about, I won't be giving my opinion this time. I will simply present you with all of the facts, and then you can decide what you think without any inputs of my opinion. So I hope that's okay with you all. Perhaps that's a cowardly way out, that I shouldn't let those people who called me ableist slurs like a year ago now affect what I do a year later. But honestly, I'd rather be called a coward than ableist slurs. So, you know, I'm fine with that. So I just won't be giving my opinion this time. But I'd love to hear your opinion on the topic in the comments. But anyway, let's just get into it. So first of all, as we always do, who is R.F. Kuang? I'm sure most of you already know, but just in case, R.F. Kuang, first name Rebecca, is a Chinese writer. She was born in China, but she moved to the US when she was 4 years old. But in terms of her writing, she mainly writes fantasy such as Babel, the Poppy War trilogy, and Catabasis. I don't know, I work in a bookshop. I've heard many different pronunciations of this book and I don't know which one is correct. But she has also written outside of the fantasy genre with Yellowface. And she's what I would describe as a well-renowned writer, having won several awards, with Babel having won a Nebula Award in 2022. Personally, I have actually only read Babel, but from what I've read about her other works, R.F. Kuang often writes about oppression, including colonialism, which sounds like a random detail for me just to throw in there, but it will become important later, so just put a pin in it for now. So what is the situation involving R.F. Kuang we are talking about today? So R.F. Kuang was announced as attending the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature. As you can see here from the National Arts Instagram, R.F. Kuang, Asma Khan and Scott Turow to headline Emirates Airline Festival of Literature. So what is it? Very briefly, since it's really not that relevant as like the exact details of the events, the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature is a literature festival. It sounds like any other literature festival, to be honest. The Emirates Airline Festival of Literature is the Arab world's largest celebration of the written and spoken word, featuring international and regional writers, poets, thinkers and speakers from around the world. Over the last 15 years, more than 2,000 authors from over 100 countries have spoken at the festival. The festival reached more than 380,000 people in person and via live streaming. So it's going to be held at the start of next year from the 21st to the 27th of January, and like I said before, it sounds like a very typical run-of-the-mill literature festival. They're going to have workshops about writing, talks with agents and publishers, and talks from writers about their books. Like, it just sounds like a pretty standard literature festival. You know, nothing really much to it in terms of the grand scheme of literary festivals. However, when R.F. Kuang was announced to be headlining this festival, there was a lot of backlash. So what's the problem here? Why are people annoyed that an author is attending a literature festival, which is something authors do? Like, I've been like in attendance at 2 as a speaker. Like, why? Why are people outraged? That's a normal thing to do. The reason people are so outraged, and there has been so much backlash, is due to the location of this literature festival. So the festival is being held in the UAE, specifically in Dubai, and is being held under the patronage, and I hope I'm saying this correctly, I did look it up but I probably still will get it wrong, under the patronage of Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, who's the current ruler of Dubai and is also the Vice President and the Prime Minister of the UAE. How you can be all three at once is beyond me, but given one man holding all those positions, you may have guessed that the UAE, if you didn't know much about it before, is often described as autocratic, which means one person is in charge and that one person has absolute power. So without going into it too much, it's basically a bit like a dictatorship, really. And there are also a lot of human rights violations, such as the criminalisation of homosexuals and trans people. The United Arab Emirates criminalises same-sex sexual activity between men and between women. The gender expression of trans people is also criminalised. Sentences include a maximum penalty of death. There is evidence of the law being enforced in recent years, and LGBT people are subject to discrimination and violence. And there is also a huge concern for women's rights in the UAE. Women have the same constitutional rights as men but remain completely unprotected in key areas. Women can vote, drive, own property, work and get an education. However, some of these require approval from their guardian. Keep in mind that, within the UAE, legal requirements exist alongside respect for Islamic law. So for example, the law states that the age of consent for marriage is 18. However, in the Quran, the age of consent for marriage is puberty. Therefore, legally, children under 18 can get married with the approval of a judge. This, coupled with the unspoken nature of child or forced marriages, makes it hard to determine how widespread such practices are. Female genital mutilation, or FGM, is banned in state hospitals and clinics in the UAE. However, there are still some private clinics in rural areas where this happens. There are no numbers on how widespread FGM is. However, a 2011 study found that 34% of participants had undergone some form of FGM. Domestic violence is illegal in the UAE because Islam allows a husband to chastise or discipline his wife and minor children. Sadly, when women go to the police to report violence, the police don't always take claims seriously because they are considered a private domestic matter. Wives are obligated to obey their husbands. Rape victims seeking support can be, and have been, charged with illicit sex, which is illegal and criminalised in the UAE. In this respect, women's rights in the United Arab Emirates fall short of other cultures around the world. And also during the research for this video, I found this really great post from the International Law blog. I've decided that I'm going to read the whole thing out because I think it's absolutely brilliant and tells you everything you need to know, particularly that pertains to this video, but I will link it down below so you can see all of the sources they use, like throughout the article. If you click on each number, it will take you straight to where their source list, where it refers to in their source list. Over the past few years, the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, has actually promoted itself as a safe, modern destination for business and tourism, presenting cities like Dubai and Abu Dhabi as global financial hubs. This carefully crafted image is reinforced by iconic skylines and a business-friendly environment, characterised by low taxes and high levels of security. However, Human Rights Watch describes it as a strategy to paint the country as progressive, tolerant and rights-respecting. This polished image as an attempt to evade scrutiny stands in stark contrast to the reality of the UAE's human rights record, both within its borders and on the international stage, which indicates the international community may need to deploy innovative strategies to achieve international justice and accountability in this complex case. For over a decade, the authorities in the UAE have systematically silenced any Emirati who voiced even the slightest dissent. A turning point came in April 2011, when they conducted a wave of arrests targeting human rights defenders who had signed a petition calling for constitutional and parliamentary reforms. In July 2013, 69 of the 94 defendants were convicted, with sentences ranging from 7 to 15 years in prison. The court's rulings were final, with no possibility of appeal. In July 2024, Human Rights Watch revealed that a new mass trial, referred to as the UAE 84, had taken place, during which the court handed down severe sentences, including life imprisonment, for 43 of the accused. Many of these defendants had already been sentenced in the earlier UAE 94 trial, raising serious concerns about double jeopardy, as they were being prosecuted on essentially the same charges. Just as these individuals were nearing the end of their sentences and expected to be released, new charges were unexpectedly brought against them, extending their imprisonment. It was also revealed that many of these defendants had been transferred to controversial rehabilitation centres, which have been criticised for their harsh conditions and for being used as a form of political punishment rather than genuine rehabilitation. On Friday the 15th of November 2024, Mary Lawler, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders, delivered a critical speech at a panel discussion on the UAE at Cardozo Law School in New York City. I don't think I pronounced that law school name correctly, my apologies. She highlighted the ongoing plight of numerous human rights defenders in the UAE, many of whom have been in prison for over a decade under broad anti-terrorism laws. Lawler pointed out that these individuals have been convicted on vague charges and deprived of basic rights, including the right to family visits and access to legal counsel. Lawler expressed grave concern about the prolonged detention and ill treatment of these defenders, including allegations of torture and arbitrary detention. She noted that despite the UAE government's response to UN communications citing guarantees of fair trial, protection from torture and freedom of expression, the actual situation on the ground contradicts these assurances. For example, the UAE has failed to ratify even some of the most basic human rights conventions, such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. She also recalled that the UAE had accepted 4 recommendations on freedom of expression, none of which had been implemented. It echoes earlier statements by several UN experts, including Ben Saul, UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism, who expressed concern about the situation in the UAE, in particular the sentencing of individuals to life imprisonment on terrorism-related charges. Condemning the use of vague counter-terrorism laws and the lack of due process, the experts call for the immediate release of detainees and for legal reforms that respect fundamental rights. While many may not be fully aware of the situation within the UAE, particularly the authorities' actions to silence dissent, conduct unfair trials, and imprison and torture human rights defenders, their conduct on the international stage further exposes serious human rights violations. This has prompted prominent public figures, including US rapper Macklemore, to take action, with the artist cancelling his show in Dubai over the country's alleged involvement in the deadly conflict in Sudan. The UAE is accused of funding the RSF, a paramilitary group allegedly responsible for atrocities, including the killing and rape of civilians. Since April 2023, Sudan has been embroiled in a civil war, described by Martin Griffiths, Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, as the world's largest humanitarian crisis. In just over a year and a half, 11 million people have been displaced, with an estimated 30 million people facing acute levels of food insecurity and a severe lack of medical support. The conflict in Sudan has been further fueled by external actors supplying weapons and support. In January 2024, UN experts presented credible evidence showing that the UAE had been sending weapons to the RSF several times a week, breaching a long-standing United Nations arms embargo. Amnesty International has since corroborated these findings, revealing that the RSF is now using UAE-supplied weapons, including military technology manufactured in France. Moreover, the UAE has been accused of misusing the Red Crescent emblem to ship arms under the guise of humanitarian aid, which could amount to a war crime under the Geneva Convention. In any event, the UAE's ongoing military support and its role in the arms trade have only served to escalate the violence, exacerbating the suffering of Sudanese civilians. The international community's growing concerns over the UAE's domestic repression are therefore compounded by its involvement in global conflicts, such as the ongoing crisis in Sudan, where its military support has fueled violence and humanitarian suffering. Despite the UAE's promises to uphold international human rights standards, its track record paints a starkly different picture. The reality of its actions on the ground equally suggests a troubling disregard for the rule of law, the rights of individuals, and global peace efforts. As UN experts, human rights organisations, and international observers continue to call for change, the UAE's actions remain a significant point of concern for both its own citizens and the broader global community, especially because the country appears to be actively attempting to avoid any international scrutiny or accountability. The international community may need to resort to innovative strategies to try to uphold international law, even in exceedingly complex cases such as that of the UAE. So I'm sure you can tell from all the information I've just given you, there is a whole host of human rights violations happening in the UAE that honestly just seem like an everyday occurrence, but the largest concern right now with the UAE is that Dubai is allegedly supplying weapons to Sudan for the civil war, particularly to the RSF, which is why the announcement of Kuang attending a literature festival in Dubai received so much backlash. That is why people are so outraged. And I actually saw all of this happening, like all this outrage going on, actually on my Twitter rather than TikTok. I can't find that many videos about it on TikTok, I'm not really sure why, at least what I'm searching for anyway, but I saw it all on Twitter, which first of all I was confused about because I mainly use Twitter. I'm not calling it X, do not like Elon Musk, but I have another YouTube channel where I talk about Miraculous Ladybug, and Twitter is the best place to find like all the content for my videos, for like the spoiler videos I make, like when a new trailer releases or new images and stuff. Twitter does seem to be the best place, but that's pretty much what my whole feed is filled with, so I was a bit confused. I started suddenly to get stuff about writers when I don't really search for that. But anyway, there was quite a lot of outrage on Twitter about this situation. After making a career out of talking about colonisation, forced labour and displacement, R.F. Kuang is headlining a literature festival in Dubai. Nothing she writes means anything to me after this. It just shows that wealth only cares about wealth. We're talking about the lady who wrote this series? That R.F. Kuang? The R.F. Kuang thing is awful, but no one really talking about the other authors going to that event once again demonstrates that you lot scrutinise her or criticise her more than her peers. I'm gonna get back to that in a minute, just put a pin in that about other people not being scrutinised for going to this festival. So as a result of all this backlash, R.F. Kuang has indeed now pulled out of the festival, and she posted this statement to her Instagram story. Thanks for all your messages today on the UAE festival. I wanted to share that I'd already pulled out, and this is why. I hate that this falls on the people who are doing this most to bring writers together, but I've always stood by BDS calls and I continue to do so now. Dear all, I'm writing to let you know that due to current events in Sudan, I am no longer able to travel to Dubai to attend the Festival of Literature. I have always respected organised calls for cultural boycotts against genocide from communities directly affected, and in particular, guidelines set forth by the BDS movement. I'm adhering now to the Palestinian BDS National Committee's recent call, given the mass atrocities in Sudan. I would appreciate if you could remove me from the programming, social media and from festival assets. I am so sorry that the burden for dealing with state actions this falls on you in this way. I understand deeply that organising a literary festival is a labour of love and that we do this because storytelling can bring us together during awful times. I would love to join you in Dubai when there is no longer a need for a boycott. With much regret and all my respect, Rebecca. So I think from that screenshot, like the second half that starts with Dear All, is possibly the email R.F. Kuang sent to the festival organisers. I'm not sure, I've never pulled out a literary festival before, so I'm not actually sure how it works. However, while people are happy that she has pulled out, there was also some backlash to her response, especially around the ending, I would love to join you in Dubai when there is no longer a need for a boycott. Not R.F. Kuang managing to blow pulling out of speaking at a literary festival at Dubai by saying she'd love to go normally, except there's a requested boycott. Her statement is sure something. This feels so flimsy. It feels like she's positioning the genocide in Sudan as something new, but if she's an advocate for Palestine, she should be aware, then saying she wants to go to Dubai in the future if the genocide stops. But Dubai wouldn't exist without Sudan. It's off. So much to unpack here. Sudanese people have been genocided for years now. You'd think someone who wrote 4 books on colonialism would be aware of the most dire humanitarian crisis of our time and who is behind it, and would therefore not agree to the festival in the first place? Uncomfortable with the idea of punishing readers and festival organised for their government's actions. We clearly need to discuss more about settler states and slavery, because I do not like this part at all. Dubai is 88 to 90% expats. They are not innocent or ignorant. Yeah, to be honest, regardless of whether R.F. Kuang pulled out or not, girl, you have way too many resources at your disposal for me to believe you were simply uneducated about what was going on. So while R.F. Kuang has pulled out of the Literature Festival, a lot of people, as you can see from those tweets I just read out, aren't happy with her agreeing to go in the first place, and also her response to it. But now we need to ask the question, why is it seemingly only R.F. Kuang who is receiving backlash for this festival? The Emirates Airline Literature Festival is a large event with a lot of authors in attendance. This is a screen recording of all of the listed speakers. You can see the amount of speakers still attending this event. There is no R.F. Kuang on this list. I only took this screen recording yesterday and she had already pulled out of the event, so she won't be on this here. But R.F. Kuang seems to be the only one getting backlash. And this is the only time I'm going to give my opinion. Well, it's not an opinion, it's more of an assumption, but I'm assuming the reason she is receiving backlash over the other writers is because, as I said before, she's first of all a rather well-known writer, and also a lot of R.F. Kuang's work is about oppression and colonialism. So it seems she has received this much backlash because of what she stands for in her writing, yet is willing, or rather was willing since she's no longer going, to go to a literature festival in Dubai, who is allegedly basically sponsoring a civil war in Sudan. So I read this tweet out earlier. The R of Kuang thing is awful, but no one really is talking about the other authors going to the event once again demonstrates that you lot scrutinise or criticise her more than her peers. And someone replied to this and said, or, and hear me out, R.F. Kuang's whole brand is writing about the negative impact of colonisation on marginalised groups. So the discourse is centred around her because it's ironic, especially since her fanbase acts clueless whenever people rightfully criticise her shallow writing. However, another popular writer has also received backlash for being announced as attending this event, which is Samantha Shannon, who has also since pulled out of the festival, and this was her response. I have withdrawn from the Emirates Festival of Literature after being alerted to international calls to boycott. I wanted to ensure that my publisher had informed the festival organisers before I announced my withdrawal on here. I want to clarify that I was not aware of any calls to boycott the EFL or the United Arab Emirates in general until yesterday. Throughout my career, I've always tried to be honest and open with my readers, so I also want to explain the reasons I initially accepted the invitation to speak in Dubai. I have always held a strong belief that literary festivals are a powerful force for good. They provide a space for authors and readers to come together to share ideas, forge communities, and celebrate intellectual curiosity, education, and artistic expression. In an age of escalating censorship and division, these spaces are more important than ever. For those reasons, my instinct is usually to accept invitations from literary festivals. When I received the invitation from the EFL, I wasn't aware of UAE involvement in Palestine or Sudan, but I still had reservations, given that the UAE has a poor track record on human rights, including its treatments of the LGBTQ+ community. I was actually a little surprised by the invitation, given the content of my books and the fact that I am openly gay. I checked that the organisations of the EFL were aware of my sexuality and what I write about. They were, and I eventually decided to accept the invitation, hoping, perhaps naively, that I could do some good with the platform and visibility I would have in Dubai. I intended to frankly discuss subjects I confront in my work, imperialism, war, oppression, and I felt confident that other authors at the festival would be doing the same. Separate from this, I have complicated feelings about avoiding events in specific territories because I am uncomfortable with the idea of punishing readers and festival organisations for their government's actions. I am always willing to listen and change my course, and it's extremely important to me that I live in accordance with the values I espouse in my books. I've now researched the reasons behind international calls to boycott the UAE, which I fully understand and respect. I have therefore chosen to withdraw from the festival to adhere to the guidelines of the BDS, Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement, and to stand in solidarity with the people of Sudan. And I would say in general the response to Samantha Shannon's statement has been a lot more positive compared to the statement given by R.F. Kuang. Okay, so Samantha Shannon has officially dropped from the festival in Dubai. I am glad she did her research, but I find it difficult to believe her and R.F. Kuang knew nothing of the UAE history and its implication in current genocides. How does any queer person go to a festival in a country where queer people are criminalised? Not even talking about every other thing in Dubai. So gross. So I know those were both quite negative, but I was really struggling to find really anyone seemingly to care that much about Samantha Shannon in comparison to R.F. Kuang. But anyway, that is absolutely everything I could find on this situation, but please, as always, let me know if I missed anything, and I would love to know what you think about this. I'm not going to tell you what I think about this because I don't want to get called ableist slurs again, but I would still love to know what the rest of you think. So I'd love to know what you think about all of this, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!